Yahweh, thank you for bringing us together. Father, thank you for safety. And thank you for this wonderful gathering of your people. Father, we just ask your blessings. We ask that you please send your spirit here to guide us and be in us and with us and among us. Father, please lead and guide our conversation, lead and guide our questions. And Father, please just bless us and be with us as we seek to be your people, and lead us all together as a family, and lead us all together to be one better bride, one better body for you. We ask these things in Yeshua's name. Amen. So I was thinking about it, and what I realized is I woke up at 3, and I realized this is the most important presentation of the whole Sukkot. So I didn't go back to sleep. So I put together some slides. I thought, you know what? I was just going to turn things over to John to talk, and I realized, you know what? This is the most important part of the whole presentation, because if we don't get this, we can't move forward. If we don't get this, the movement is stuck, at least in my understanding. And I've been studying this for a while. I could be wrong, but I mean, Yahweh does things in miraculous ways. But what I wanted to talk about, so John Carney, a friend, a brother, he is an elder, and I want to talk just a little bit about my understanding of what an elder is and what elders are and what elders do. And then we're going to turn it over to John and just let it go. And I'm going to just let it go as long as it goes. And whatever, if we finish up, then I'll get started on Revelation. And if we get into Revelation tomorrow, then we'll just let it run the whole time. But I realized in Revelation, we're talking about, theology, what may happen in the future and this kind of a thing. But what John is doing is what's most important in this movement. He's doing what's happening and what needs to happen right now. He's pioneering in a sense. So I would like to introduce, well, not just yet. I guess we'll introduce John at the end. But so we talked yesterday a little bit about how there's this difference between inside the land and outside the land. So inside the land, everyone comes up to the temple 3 times a year to keep the family that prays together, stays together. So we come up for a big family reunion and a barbecue, a cookout, and to support the priesthood 3 times a year. Well, outside the land, it's too far to go. So outside the land, what we do basically is we gather by cities. So in the Melchizedekian order, Yeshua has said, go forth and perform the Great Commission. Let's take this good news of me to the ends of the earth. Well, it's too far to go. Not everyone can go up to Jerusalem every year. I mean, even with plane travel, not everyone can afford it, and these kinds of things. So now we gather by city-states or by towns or by areas. So again, back in the Levitical structure, we had a separated or a set-apart priesthood with 3 levels and then organized by families. And then we had the people was divided into 12 leaders over 12 tribes, and then divided by thousands and hundreds and fifties and tens. And then there was basically a servant government, Moshe, his apprentice, or whatever you want to call it, Joshua, and the 70 elders. So that's basically, can you kind of see a tree structure in that? Yeah. Kind of just a servant leadership, but a supporting tree structure. Okay, here's what it is in the Melchizedekian order. Here's what we have now. Same principles, same concept, a slightly different organization because we got a different mission. We're no longer trying to gather around a temple. We're trying to take it to every city. So here we've got basically the priesthood, and this is going to be about 1 out of 400 if the first century numbers hold true. Not very many, relatively few Melchizedekian priests. And here's John. So we're going to have an elder or a board of elders, however it works out, in every city. Servants, also called deacons, and then a lot of people. Can we see the tree structure? We'll take a look at tree structures again as we go on further through the presentation. Shalom. 1 Timothy 3 and verse 1. This is a faithful saying. If a man desires the position of a bishop or an elder, just in the Hebrew the word is zaken, is someone who's older, he desires a good work. Okay, so what's an elder supposed to be like? It says, an elder then must be blameless, the husband of one wife, temperate, sober-minded, of good behavior, hospitable, able to teach, some versions read apt to teach, not given to wine, not violent, not greedy for money, but gentle, not quarrelsome, not covetous. One who rules his own house well, having his children in submission with all reverence. The guy's not perfect, but basically he's got things in order. He says, for if a man doesn't know how to rule his own house, how's he going to lead Yahweh's house? How's he going to serve in Yahweh's house? It says, for if a man doesn't know how to rule his own house, then how will he take care of the assembly of Elohim? It says, not a novice, lest being puffed up with pride, he should fall into the same condemnation as the devil, because pride was the first sin. Satan said, I will exalt my throne upon the sides of the north. It says, if that wasn't enough, moreover, he must have a good testimony among those who are outside the assembly. He's got to have a good reputation in the community, lest he fall into reproach and the snare of the devil. So basically what we're saying is, he and his wife, as one flesh, they form a team that they can lead by example, because that's Yeshua's model of leadership, is by example. Yeshua set the standard, and we attempt to follow in his footsteps. We attempt to walk along the same way as he walked. Different job, different roles there's different roles. But anyway, he doesn't have to be perfect. He just has to be a good example unto the flock. And that's what an elder does. So we'll see this again in the Revelation presentation. As we move forward, and I'll explain this later, we're basically, in my understanding, we're waiting on Seal 6, which will be marked by a nuclear blast or a nuclear conflict in the Middle East. And maybe also some strikes here in America and around the world. We don't know exactly. But at that time, there will be the formation of what's called the stick of Ephraim. It's mentioned in Ezekiel 37. Once again, the word stick, tree, it's the same word in Hebrew. It connotes something that's got firmness to it, something that's got life to it. But so here we have the root is Yeshua. Here we have the priesthood. Here we have the elders. And there we have the cities. So once again, this basic tree structure with Yeshua as the root. So we'll see that again. But we're seeing the same exact thing. We see servant leadership in a bunch of different levels, in a bunch of different ways. Well, Peter talks about elders also, because the elders are the real deal. They're the real workhorses. I sit, and I type and I come up with theories and ideas and talk about prophecy and this kind of stuff. But what the people need is they need someone who can help guide them and show them the light and the way. And that's what an elder does. So Peter, it's interesting he also served as an elder. At one point he was in the priesthood, and then he became an elder. He says, but the elders who are among you, I exhort, I who am a fellow elder and a witness of the sufferings of Messiah, and also a partaker of the glory that will be revealed. He says, shepherd, he's pleading with us. He says, shepherd the flock which is among you, shepherd the flock of Elohim which is among you, serving as elders or overseers or bishops. It's all the same word. He says, not by compulsion, but willingly. This is something that should be laid upon your heart. This is something you want to do, to serve people out of love for Yeshua and love for his people. It's the two greatest commandments. It's the Shema, to love Yahweh your Elohim with all your heart. What does he want? He wants us to love our neighbor as ourselves, because the entire commandment is fulfilled in this: you shall love your neighbor by yourself. How much do we love our neighbors as we love ourselves if we see people who are hurting and we're not willing to give of our time and our money and our life and our energies to sacrifice for them and to help lead them and guide them in the way? We have to be called. But if this is something Yahweh lays on our heart to do, if Yahweh lays it on our heart to do this, then we desire a good work. He says, not by compulsion, but willingly, not for dishonest gain, because the elders collect the tithe and use that to conduct the Great Commission in their area. He says, but eagerly. This is something you want to do. He says, nor as being lords over those entrusted to you. Don't lord it over the people. He says, but being examples to the flock. And that's exactly what an elder and his wife are. They're examples to the flock. He says, and then when the chief shepherd appears, when Yeshua comes, you will receive the crown of glory that does not fade away. Good morning. So I shared with John what we're going to talk about all week, the Revelation presentation. John came out, I gave this in California 2 years ago. Gerald and Kim were there also. I've updated it since then. I've brought in some new material and some new information. And John and I, we talked, and he saw which direction we're going with this thing, and he says, how can I help? And I said, you know, what we really need are some elders. We really need some people. And he's like, well, that's a hard job. And I'm like, yeah, a really hard job. That's where the rubber meets the road. I mean, I can sit and type, but if people don't do this thing, then the movement's stuck. So with that, I would like to introduce John Carney.
Well, Baruch Hashem Yahweh, I want to thank Norman for the opportunity to come and speak to everybody here today. Just a minute here while you get wired up. Does that look right? And throw that over, and if you can just find a place to hook it back there. Good? Okay.
Okay, and this here is, give me 2 seconds.
Sure.
That's forward and back.
Okay, I think I can work with that. Well, praise Yahweh that we all are able to come here for the Feast of Tabernacles, and it sure is a blessing to be able to meet some of the new people that I've seen here so far. And wow, where do I start? Norman kind of oversimplified the elder part. It goes a little deeper than that, but I really don't have a lot of time to get into that because today what I'm going to speak on is something that took me probably at least 15 hours of teaching, which is probably over a 3-month period in my local fellowship. And I had to condense it down into roughly an hour, maybe an hour and 15 minutes. I really don't want to take away from Norman, but we'll see where it goes. He's given me a little bit of latitude. If it needs to go a little more, we will. What I'm going to talk about today is something that is extremely important. It's something that Yahweh has been really laying on my heart heavily. Let me give a little bit of a background before I actually get into the message. Let me go forward here. The message today is basically called Keeping Our Covenant Pure. Keeping our covenant pure. A lot of impurity has come and crept into our faith. And I'm going to go through this. And what I want you to do is I want you to look at this presentation as kind of like taking a snapshot. If you look outside, we got a panoramic view of these mountains, which are so beautiful. And you take a shot here, and you take a shot there, and you take a shot, and you keep moving around, and you take shots. That's what this is really designed to be today, because I don't have 18 hours to go through this in great detail. I don't want to overwhelm you too much, although some of you who have not been around a while will probably feel like your head is spinning a little bit with some of what I'm going to give you. Those of you who are seasoned in the faith will grasp what I'm saying if you don't already understand what it is. But the point of this message today is that we have a paradox. And the paradox is that Yahweh is calling people, and I'm going to use mainly the church, the Christian church, because that's where the vast majority are coming from. And it's creating a problem in our Hebraic roots, as Norman has been trying to teach on for so many years now. And so what's happening is they're bringing over their baggage from Christianity, and they're mixing it with the Hebraic roots. And so I'm a little bit distant from being online as far as being in chat rooms and discussion areas and looking at other ministry websites, but people in my fellowship come to me and say, you know, I read this or I saw that, and I saw this conversation going on between these people, and they're cutting each other's throats, and they're at odds with one another, and there's so many different doctrines, and week after week I'm hearing all these problems that are going on. And I really felt like Yahweh, when he gave me this basic concept to talk about in my fellowship, which I'm bringing here today, is it's really not much different today than it was back in Shaul's time, the Apostle Paul. And what I'm going to do today is I'm going to go through basically the book of Galatians. I'm going to go from chapter 1 to chapter 6. But I'm only going to pick out certain highlights, as I stated before, because there's just so much meat in there that has to be dissected. There's so many things that are going on in those texts that I think most people don't understand. One of the other issues that is coming up that I'm seeing as well is you have females, mostly I'm seeing younger females, who are seeing Shaul as a male chauvinist. And so they don't want to read him at all. They dispel everything that he says. Other people are saying, well, yeah, he seemed to be a great guy, but he wasn't authentic. You know, his doctrine is mixed up. Some think that in one moment he's schizophrenic because one moment he's talking pro-Torah and the next moment he's taking it away. I'm going to show a little bit of a glimpse inside his world. I'm a Jew. I understand how a Jew thinks. And matter of fact, when Norman said to me 2 years ago, John, why don't you go back and why don't you start a fellowship? I thought he was off his rocker because that was the last thing that I wanted to do. And then I said to him, I said, but Norman, I said, you're an Ephraimite. Your movement is an Ephraimite movement. I'm a Jew. What does a Jew belong in an Ephraimite movement? And then he says to me, does it matter? And I thought to myself, does it matter? Maybe, maybe not. But the more I've looked back at this last 2-year journey that I've been on, what I see is, for me anyway, is that, yes, it does matter. Because in essence, Shaul was a hardline Jew also. I can relate to him. I'm a hardline Jew, or came from that background. Not from traditional Judaism per se, but my personality, the way I see things. Everything is black and white. There's no gray area. Everything is just black and white. And so therefore, I see that I actually relate better to the Ephraimites in this movement than I do my brother Jews. My brothers have kicked me out of their congregations because they don't like the fact that I stand for Ephraim, that I respect Ephraim, that I believe Ephraim is just as much a part of the covenant of Judah as Judah has, whereas Judah wants to treat Ephraim as a second-class citizen. But that's really another story. So let's get into the message today. In Shaul's day, he had to deal with so many groups that had so many different beliefs. And what I'm hoping today is, as I go through this presentation, is that you'll be able to see the parallels of what Shaul had to deal with in his day, and it's really no different today. And so the other purpose of this presentation is to help those of us who don't already understand this concept to be able to take this information and see Scripture from a completely different perspective than the way we have been trained in the past, and be able to pierce into the pages of the Scriptures and be able to see what's really going on behind the scenes, and use that as a metaphor to learn how to recognize the kinds of unclean spirits that are penetrating our movement, and they are watering down our faith. They're watering down our doctrine. We already know from Scripture that in the end times that they will heap up teachers for themselves who will have itchy ears and they want to tell them what they want to hear. And I see a lot of that. But we also know that Scripture says that they will not be able to endure sound doctrine. And Norman is trying to stand up for sound doctrine. I have to tell you, I've been in the Hebrew roots faith for approximately 34 years now. And I'm not going to go through that, but what I will say is that of all the people that I've had associations with, and I've been burned by several of them in different ways, Norman is the only one that I've found that really seems to have a pure heart. Does he have everything perfect? No. Do we agree perfectly on everything? No. Shoot, I don't even agree with myself on half the things that I think of. But what I see is a man who has a passion and a desire to speak the truth as he sees it in the purest form that I've been able to see. And I'm not saying that to build him up. I'm just saying it as a fact in my world, in the experiences that I've had, in the associations I've had with other ministries. And so I could have elected to join up with a big ministry, and I won't mention names, and find myself a place in there. I'm not interested in that. We're in a little room at a small feast site compared to anybody else's, and there's not a lot of people here. But the ones that are here is important. And that's where we start. It starts off small as a mustard seed, and it grows from there. So let's move on. What I'm going to talk about is HaSatan's strategy. What was HaSatan's strategies during the time of Shaul? Quite frankly, after I went through the book of Galatians and the detail that I went through it, I am quite shocked that he wasn't carted off by the men in the white coats, because he must have gone insane dealing with all the peripheral groups and all the different strategies that HaSatan was using to completely destroy the Galatian fellowship, as well as Ephesians and Colossians, but I'm not going into them today. So let's take a look. I've broken this down in some very simplistic points, and we'll go through them one by one. Quickly, take captive new believers. That's one of his strategy. When a person comes in out of the church and they're coming into the Hebraic roots, the first thing HaSatan wants to do is circumvent them, create a detour sign, take them away from the truth of like what Norman is teaching, and just add a little something with a little bit of flavor over here, and they're being diverted somewhere else. All you got to do is just change it just a little bit, and there's a problem. The next section is going to be sneaking in external groups. I've had it in my fellowship. Like Norman, I run an Acts 15 compliant fellowship. I basically have spiritual bouncers at the front door by doing the Acts 15 fellowship. We rarely ever have drama or unclean spirits manifesting themselves in our fellowship, unlike traditional organized religious fellowships. And so I think that's really important. So anybody can just sneak in, and this is what was happening with them. The third one is to redefine the righteousness of Yeshua. I think this is probably one of the areas that is most important to HaSatan. Because once he knows a person has been called into this faith, he can't stop that. But if he can get that person to view the righteousness of Yeshua in such a way that's perverted just a little bit, that person has now cut another covenant and integrated it with the covenant of Yeshua. And now you've got a different Messiah. It's that simple, it's that subtle. We're going to go through a little bit of that. The philosophies of men. We're going to deal with the philosophies of men, which is quite extensive. We're also going to go through the two covenants, which was actually 500 years before Moses on the same mountain. Not too many people have really thought about that. We'll go through that slightly. Also, what he did also was he used the Jews, who portrayed themselves as priests, to pervert circumcision to keep the new converts from entering the temple to worship. If you've ever been in a hardcore Messianic Jewish fellowship run by Jewish rabbis, if you're in the inner circle, like I've been, you'll know that they have a little joke that goes on, because when they see an Ephraimite, which they don't view as an Ephraimite, they just view it as a Gentile, comes in and he puts on the yarmulke and he puts on the talit, they go, oh, he's trying to be a Jew boy. And they have this little joke, that they have they won't let the congregation know about it, but I've heard that kind of stuff. So there's this concept, some a little more blatantly in there, where their belief is, we're Jews, we own the covenant, we own the Torah, therefore your job as the Gentile is come in and put your money on the table and support us so that we can keep Torah, and you go and not keep Torah. You eat your pork, you don't have to come in on the Sabbath, and all these other things that we understand. And that is the system that is set up in Messianic Judaism in many places. I'm not speaking of all, I'm speaking in a general sense where it's run by rabbinical Jews. So, this same concept was going on way back then. I'm going to show you a bit about that. And the point is to help you to be on guard, because HaSatan is very crafty. And so today is about showing how he craftily comes in and circumvents our faith, ever so subtly. That's how it starts. It's usually not the big blatant stuff in your face. It's very subtle. And if you don't develop spiritual sensory acuity in the spirit realm, you're going to have a hard time, and he's going to whoop you, and you're going to be very frustrated. So my job today is to try to give you a little bit of a glimpse into his world, how he operates, and then on Friday, when I give the next message, it's about walking into victory. How to take the authority you already have over this guy and whoop him at his own game and take the war into his territory. That will be for Friday. But today, as Norman says, we got to get through this. So, lastly, use external groups to cause a diversity of false doctrines. So, quickly take captive new believers. Let's start reading in Galatians chapter 1, and I'm going to start off in verse 6. I marvel that you are turning away as to... Now, let me say something right here. When you see it in red, this is what I've developed what is called an enhanced interlinear translation. So in other words, as many of you know, when you study your scriptures, you read a word, as my friend back here, we were talking last night, he sees the word twice, patience, I think you said it was. And I think it was in Ephesians, if I'm not mistaken, but whatever it was. In the same verse, he sees the word patience twice. But then when he dug a little deeper, he realized that one of the words patience really doesn't mean patience, it means something else. And the other one actually meant patience. So when you dig into those words, you get a lot more meaning out of it, and you get it in its proper context. So you have to assume that the translators, who were mainly Greek in this case, were Greekanizing or Gentilizing our Hebraic root scriptures. And they're not looking at it from a Hebraic perspective. They're looking at it from a Gentile one. So you automatically have to assume that what you're reading really needs to be questioned or at least verified. And that's what I'm doing. So when I say as to change sides, that comes from the word away, turning away in the Greek. So in other words, the translator could have said, you are as to changing sides, but he chose not to use that. So I'm not adding anything here that is not in the original Greek, although I may be adding a few words to make it sound grammatically correct with the rest of it. Just so you understand, when you see the red, you'll understand where I'm coming from. So let's go on. I marvel that you are turning away as to change sides so soon from him who called you in the grace of Messiah to a different gospel. Verse 7, which is not another, but there are some who trouble by stirring you to agitation like water. When water boils in a pot, it becomes violent, okay? And that's the gist of it. And want to pervert and corrupt the gospel of Messiah. So, as we're seeing in the beginning, Shaul is starting off by making his complaints and his observations to the Galatians that he sees that we got a problem here. We got a problem in that I have brought you up from infants into this faith, and in essence, they did not get past their infancy. And that's the problem that I see in the body of Messiah today, is that too many in the body of Messiah are staying in their infancy. I will touch on that on Friday, that there are 3 steps to our growth in this movement, as Yeshua lines it out. And so what happens is, Paul is trying to bring across the point that I realize what's going on, and now I'm going to address it. The good thing about Shaul is, unlike his prior nature, he starts off generally being a bit polite and gives good points, which is good, and then he really starts to launch into them. So let's go to the next section, which is sneaking in external groups. So now we're going to jump to Galatians chapter 2. And this occurred because of false brethren who were deceitfully, secretly brought by smuggling in, who came in by stealth to spy out our liberty as a citizen and not a slave. So they were trying to portray themselves as a citizen, but not as a slave. We are slaves to Yeshua. And so these guys are trying to proclaim themselves to be citizenship with that, but they really are not a slave, which we have in Messiah Yeshua, that they might bring us into bondage as a slave. And what he's saying is, they're coming in with this agenda. They've got these false doctrines that they're going to pervert the gospel of Yeshua, they're going to pervert his righteousness, and then they're going to take you captive. And we'll go a little bit more deeper into that as we go along. Verse 6, but from those who seem to be of the same meaning as us, to be something of truth, whatever they were, it makes no difference to me. Yahweh shows personal favoritism to no man. For those who seem to be of the same truth as us, to be something added nothing of imparted knowledge to me. So what he's saying is that when they came in, they brought in these philosophies. And when they brought these philosophies in, it sounded really good. And if you listen to people out there, teachers, who are in the Hebraic roots now, is mainly what I'm talking about, they got a good dialogue. They're good speakers. They have a charismatic personality. They have an extensive knowledge background. But they got just a little something that they're mixing. And it sounds good. Tastes good. But you better be careful what you put inside, because it's tainted. And so what he's saying is, it looked like all that stuff, but it didn't impart any knowledge to me. It didn't add anything to me. So, in verse 5, to whom we did not yield as an act of weakness of submission through being subdued through intimidation. I've been in places where they tried to intimidate me. If I didn't conform, my brother here, he was thrown out. He told me last night. So you understand where I'm coming from. If you don't conform to that hierarchy and the spirit that rules that leadership, then that is what they use. They use intimidation. Do not let anybody intimidate you at all. Do not let anybody intimidate you. Even for an hour, because that's of the doctrine of the Nicolaitans, if you know what that is, but that's not for here right now. Even for an hour, that the truth of the gospel might continue with you. Verse 7, but on the contrary, when they saw that the gospel of the uncircumcised, who they regard as unregenerate in state of mind. So this is how they viewed the Gentile Galatians who became converts. They viewed them as unregenerate in state of mind. That's how they saw them. So the reason why they're coming is they see them coming to the faith, but they're still unregenerate in their mind based on their philosophies. So their job is to come in and add to their faith something that's going to validate and bring it into conformity as they see it, not as how Yeshua did it at the moment the person became convicted and accepted Yeshua and that righteousness. So let's move on. Had been committed through moral conviction to me, as the gospel for the circumcision was to Peter. So now let's move on to redefining the righteousness of Yeshua. As I stated earlier, I believe this is one of the key strategies that HaSatan uses. I would say that this subject of the righteousness of Yeshua is something that's very little understood in the body of Messiah. We think that it's something maybe as simple as, and it is in part, that he died for our sins, he shed his blood, and that blood is a righteous blood, and that imparts his righteousness to us. True. That's very true. But I think that the righteousness of Yeshua goes way beyond that. I don't really have the time today to go into that, but my point here in this message is that if HaSatan can get us to see that we can add something to the righteousness of Yeshua that we already received by faith when we accepted him, somehow that makes us valid by adding something to that righteousness. And that's so far from the truth. And this is what Shaul fought so vehemently against. So let's look at this. In Galatians chapter 3, verses 1, I put 25, but we're not going that far. O foolish and unintelligent, because of your lack of desire to comprehend, Galatians. How many people do I meet do not have a desire to want to comprehend? They come on the Sabbath, they come on the feast days, they keep the dietary laws, they put a little money in the box. But beyond that, they really don't want to comprehend. And this is where the problem comes in. We have got to go beyond what we have been conditioned to. We've been conditioned by the church that you're okay just where you are. If you accepted Jesus or you accepted Yeshua, that's it. You're in like Flint. The game is over. All you need to do is endure to the end. But that's not what it's about. And on Friday, I'm going to show you how it's not that way, what Shaul is talking about. Who has bewitched by making false representations that fascinated you, that you should not obey the truth. So what they're using is they're using a doctrine or philosophy of men that's spoken and packaged in such a way that it actually fascinated these Galatians. And that was the hook. That's what got them to go along with them. This rabbit hole is going to go deep. I think you're going to be interested to see where this actually goes. That you should not obey the truth, before whose eyes Yeshua HaMashiach was clearly portrayed, that was previously ordained among you as crucified. Verse 2, this only I want to learn from you. Did you receive the Spirit by the works that are acts of the law, or by the hearing of faith? Nobody can claim that by their works of the Torah, or Talmud, or any other philosophy of men besides the Torah, can you claim your righteousness. It's by faith. That's why we are the seed of Abraham. And that needs to be our main focus. From there, we grow in knowledge. We grow in truth. We grow in the gifts of the Spirit. We grow in the fruit of the Spirit. That's what our passion should actually be. Verse 3, are you so foolish, unintelligent, that comes from sensuality of the senses? These are pretty strong words from Shaul. Very strong words. Having begun in the Spirit. So in other words, when you accepted Yeshua, you started in the Spirit. But now what these guys are doing is they're coming in and they're trying to drag you over outside of the Spirit to walk in the flesh and not walk in the Spirit. And it's amazing to me how many people don't really understand what walking in the Spirit really is as opposed to walking in the flesh. We're all on, and I include myself, we're all so much trained to be on autopilot in the flesh that when the flesh is rising up in a given circumstance, we don't even recognize we're in the flesh. We haven't accurately really defined this stuff. I have an 8-part series on YouTube that deals with that one at a time. Let's move on. You are now being made perfect by means of fulfillment of your flesh to its completion to make it perfect by the flesh. I'm leading to a point. Shaul is leading to a point. You're going to see where this goes. Verse 4, have you suffered by experiencing pain and suffering so many things in vain to the point of complete failure and without reason? In other words, it comes to vanity. You're going through all these trials and sufferings in this faith, and it doesn't come to anything because what you're doing is you're trading a spirit covenant for a fleshly one because of these groups that are coming in and they're circumventing you. So you're going through all this stuff for nothing. Think about it. If indeed it was in vain. So in other words, it initially could be in vain, but if you repent, you can then use it to your advantage, and it gives you spiritual strength, wisdom, and knowledge. We'll be talking about that on Friday as well. An example would be in Romans chapter 3, verse 21, but now the righteousness of Yahweh, apart from the law, is revealed. That's Yeshua. There is a righteousness in the Torah. Your commandments are righteousness, Psalm 119. So we know that. But that's limited because it's the letter of the law. We need to go beyond the letter of the law, and we need to go into the spirit of the law. And for that, you need Yeshua, and you need his righteousness to take you beyond that level, being witnessed by the law and the prophets. So let's go to Galatians chapter 4. Therefore, you are no longer a slave in subservience to the philosophies of men. We are outnumbered in this world because we are surrounded by every kind of philosophy that you can possibly think of in the societies in which we live in. And so, therefore, we are subjected constantly, daily, probably almost every minute of the day. When you turn on the TV, you're being subjected to the philosophies of men. And we have to be on guard about this because they all have an influence on us one way or another, and a lot of it is subconscious. You don't even realize it's actually happening. You're having seeds being implanted into your spirit, and you're not even aware of what's going on. So as my brother was saying last night, I take authority. I take control over this. And so you have to develop a sensory acuity to what's going on around you and be on guard. That's what we are. We are a priest, but we are priests that are warring priests also. We're in a war. We're in a battle. We're not just some kind of bystander just reading Scripture. And we got to take this more seriously. But a son, if a son, then an heir of Yahweh through Messiah. But then indeed, when you did not know Yahweh, you served as a slave those which by nature are not Elohims. So when we're in this world, we are serving these Elohims through these philosophies of men that are conditioning us in these societies in which we live. Did I miss a verse? Somehow I think I missed something. Sorry, I'm going in the wrong direction. Sorry, I lost my place. I think that's where I was, right? Yeah, that's where I was. Okay. All right. I hit the upper button. Sorry about that. Verse 16, I have therefore become your enemy to be hated. So now he's starting to feel the resistance of the Galatians because he's calling them out. And he's calling out these other groups that are coming in and infiltrating and hijacking his people that he raised up from nothing. And so now when he's trying to tell them the truth, he's being hated for it. I know that feeling, and I know Norman does, okay? And so because I tell you the truth of proper doctrine, this is what Nazarene Israel is trying to do. Nazarene Israel is trying to establish the original faith of the apostles. And I don't think we should all get disillusioned or, what's the word I'm looking for, down and out, so to speak, because our numbers are not so big right now. Yeshua started off with the 12. You know, he started off with the 12. So verse 17, they zealously with warm feelings court you. Man, have I had how many people come to me who had an agenda. I knew they had an agenda, and they pat me on the back, and they tell me nice things. Oh, John, you're this, and you're anointed, and this, and they'll tell you all kinds of stuff. And then if you let them close enough, they put a hook in you. And then you're in trouble. So they zealously with warm feelings court you, but for no good. Yes, they want to exclude by shutting you out, that you may be zealous with warm feelings for them. You see, the end result is they want their flesh propped up. They want to make you a proselyte and a convert so that you can come under their authority with their doctrines, with their philosophies, to circumvent you from what you're following so that they can parade you around as one of their converts. This was very common back in Shaul's day. Let's move on. Verse 19, my little children, for whom I labor and felt the pains in birth again until Messiah is formed, as adjusting your inward parts. You see, Yeshua has been given birth inside of us, but he has to be formed. He has to come to a full formation within inside of ourselves. I'll be talking a little bit about that concept on Friday as well. I would like in verse 20 to be present with you and now to change my tone, for I have doubts that there is no way out for and about you. And the same thing with, when you get to the end of Galatians, you start seeing where he really gets so frustrated that he really starts to tell them, basically, I'll paraphrase, in a sense, he's saying, basically, you have gone so far away from what I brought you to. I espoused you to one husband, and you have switched him for another husband. And you've gone so far down the river on this thing that no matter how much of the Ruach I might have, no matter how much knowledge I might have, no matter how much persuasion I might have, I feel like that is even not enough. You are lost. And I'll never be able to redeem you back. And if you really read his words closely, that's what he's saying to them. That's how frustrated he was that after all this laboring that he put into these people, so simply they're being hijacked. And, unfortunately for Shaul, he didn't stay in one place. He traveled. And so you had these peripheral groups that would come in behind him when he would leave the town, and they would come in and they would undo the things that he was doing. So he couldn't stay there and keep a watch over it so easily. So anyway, let's move on. Verse 20, I would like to be present with you, and now to change my tone, I have doubts that there is no way out for you and about you. Okay, let's take a look at this two covenants. 500 years before Moses. Let's move on to verse 21. Tell me, you who desire rather to be under or beneath the law of Moses with Talmudic mixture in it. Christianity, when they see the word law, they're automatically going to think it's the Torah. It's not always the Torah. Sometimes it's the Torah. Sometimes it's exclusively Talmud or Rabbinic Judaism. Sometimes it's a mixture. So it's important to make sure that we're in the right context of the verse and how it's being applied. So this is my take on it, but based on what the original Greek is talking about. Do you not hear with understanding the law of Moses? So clearly that should be a tip-off. Because if he's telling you, you who desire to be underneath the law of Moses, do you not hear what the law is saying? So clearly there's two laws at work here. They're hearing one law that's making them think this way, but if you're really listening to what Moses is saying without that other stuff, you should be able to come to a different conclusion with the Ruach, which is the Spirit of truth that will lead you into all truth. Verse 22, for it is written that Abraham had two sons, one by the bondwoman, the other by a free woman, who is unrestrained to go at pleasure. Verse 23, but he who was of the bondwoman was born according to the pertaining to touching. I want you to start taking note of this text now. To the flesh. So now Shaul is shifting his dialogue, and he's starting to get a little more specific about who these people are. They're about touching, and it's about the flesh. It's not about the spirit, it's about the flesh. And he of the free woman, through promise, divined assurance. So there's two different philosophies here we're talking about. In Colossians chapter 2, verses 20 through 23, it says, "Therefore, if you died with Messiah from the basic principles or orderly arrangements of the world, why, as though living in the world, do you subject yourself to regulations that are ceremonial laws? Do not touch or attach oneself to, do not taste, experience something good or pleasurable, do not handle as having anything to do with it." Now this, take note of it, because this is going to make more sense as we go along. So we got two covenants. One's of the Spirit, and one deals with the flesh. One is flesh-orientated and fixed and focused on. The other one is not. Which all concerning things which perish, that inflicts corruption to the point of destruction, with the using according to which is joined to the commandments of Talmud. Commandments of Talmud and doctrines, instructions of men. So clearly by this dialogue, he's now beginning to zero in on Talmudic or rabbinic philosophy. Something I need to say here right now. Not to condemn anybody, because that's not where I'm coming from. We don't have the right to condemn anybody. But it's about making judgments about what you see and what you know. And what I know is that Judaism is a religion of the Jews for the Jews. And it is a religion based on Talmudic philosophy, which is a bunch of rabbis arguing with themselves about what they perceive Moses meant by a statement. So they're so far away from the Torah to the point that you're now following a man-made fleshly religion that has all these ceremonial laws to add to the righteousness of the Torah, which is actually Yeshua, which doesn't belong there in the first place, and they're adding to the Torah, so they're breaking Torah by doing that. So I wanted to preface that. These things indeed have an appearance of wisdom that appears to be higher spiritual wisdom, but is worldly. Let me give an example. In Orthodox Judaism, Rabbinic Judaism, I might have the sequence wrong, but just to give an example. An Orthodox Jew, in his righteousness, when he gets out of bed in the morning, has his shoes and his socks and his pants there. And what he'll do is he has to put his pants on first, and I think he puts it through the left leg, and then he puts it through the right leg, and then he pulls it up, and he buckles it. Then he sits back down, he takes the left sock, he has to put the left sock on first, then he has to put on the right sock. Then he gets the left shoe, and he puts the left shoe on, and then he puts on the right shoe. And then he comes back, and if he has laces, he ties the left laces, then he ties the right laces. Now, if he doesn't do it exactly that way, he's defiled himself. This is the insanity of a fleshly religion. It's a philosophy of men. It has nothing to do with Yeshua, has nothing to do with Yahweh, and we need to be on guard because this is prevalent in some areas of Messianic Judaism. And like I said, I'm a fellow Jew. I love my Jewish brothers. But I'm tired of seeing this foolishness in the body of Messiah. And what I'm further tired of is watching Ephraimites who come to my fellowship who are so screwed up in their heads, forgive me for my language, but I'm passionate about this. They're so screwed up in their heads because they were screwed up in Christianity with all that nonsense. Then when they come out, they don't have much choice. Where do you go into the Hebraic roots? It's mostly Messianic Judaism. So they go there and they get corrupted with that. And then they have to unlearn Christianity. Then they have to unlearn Messianic Judaism. And then I have to come in, and Norman has to come in and try to say, this is the way. Well, how do I know your way is the right way? By this point, they're angry. And I don't really blame them. But this is how HaSatan strategizes to circumvent a believer and take them down the long, wide road to destruction. And it's frustrating that I see this because I'm trying to break things down as simply as I can for people so they can digest it in bits and pieces and assimilate it in an orderly kind of fashion that can help them through that process. But it's frustrating because many of these people are very scarred, and I feel really, really bad for them. Let's move on. So it's worldly. In self-imposed religion, and that's what that act is. It's self-imposed religion. False humility, it's false humility, and neglect of the body, but are of no value against the indulgence or gratifications of the flesh. Here we are. Where Paul's further defining this covenant of flesh that he's talking about here. Verse 24, which things are symbolic. Now, this is where it starts to get interesting. For these are the two covenants or contracts, the one from Mount Sinai, not Moses. I know where some of you are going to go. This is not talking about Moses. This is Paul's going here. He's talking 500 years before Moses went to Mount Horeb. The one from Mount Sinai, which gives birth to bondage, ceremonial slavery, which is Hagar. Hagar. Note this. This is the covenant he's talking about. The concubine of Abraham, not of the Abrahamic covenant. For this Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia. Did you know that before Mount Sinai or Mount Horeb, before Moses went there, was not called that? It was not called Sinai or Horeb. It was called Mount Hagar. It predates. And Yahweh says, I don't remember where it is in the Torah, he says he was going to make two contracts. This is the other one he was talking about. And it's relative to our day today. Because too many in the body of Messiah are cutting contracts with Hagar. And they don't even know it's happening to them. And nobody will tell them because nobody will teach the hard lines on this, like Norman's trying to teach hard lines on stuff. Oh, that's too hard. You're making too many burdens. It's truth. It's truth. At the end of the day, if it's truth. If it wasn't truth, tell me it's not truth. And then, okay, I'll side with you. But if it's truth, then we're compelled to do it. Otherwise, why are we following Yeshua in a very lukewarm kind of way? And corresponds and answers to Jerusalem. Here's the tie. Here's the tie. Follow this. Which now is and is in bondage as a voluntary slave with her children, Judah. The Jews. The Jews cut a fleshly contract, which is Hagar. Don't let nobody tell you if you ever walk into a Messianic Jewish congregation that they try to convert you to being a Jew if you're an Ephraimite. Doesn't work. That's not what you were destined to be. It's important. I gave a message many months ago about our identity in Yeshua. So many of us don't understand what our identity really is. We're struggling to figure that out. And so there's a lot of opinions about it, but a lot of those opinions are incorrect. And so when we can get to a point where we can clearly define who we are in the body of Messiah, then you become much more certain about who you are, what you stand for, and what you won't put up with. If y'all want to go down that road, I'm not saying you, but I'm saying to people, if you want to go down that road, you go by yourself. I was down that road many years ago. It says no exit. It's a dead end. If you want to walk 5 miles all the way to the end and come back out again, that's your business. I'm not going down that road. I'm getting too old for that stuff. But the Jerusalem above is free. So he makes the distinction now, going back to that other covenant. We are of the free, which is the mother of us all. We look to a heavenly country, in other words. Verse 30, nevertheless, what does the scripture say? Cast out the bondwoman and her son, for the son of the bondwoman shall not be heir with the son of the free woman. So there's no mixing, but we're mixing. Now I realize it's through ignorance, so I'm not condemning anybody, but what I'm saying is we're mixing these covenants. And it's causing so much dysfunctionalism in the body of Messiah that we're at each other's throats. We can't get along with one another. We can't agree on the calendar. We can't agree on anything. You know, it's just crazy. And I think my daughter mentioned something the other day on a chat room where a lady was saying we're Melchizedean priests, which I agree with. Norman teaches on that, you know. But what she says is because we're Melchizedean priests, we don't keep the feast days. So this thing is just going crazy. Where I came from 34 years ago, this stuff didn't exist. I live in two crazy worlds. I live in the world that I came up in the Hebraic roots, where this is the way it was, and it wasn't challenged, and it's been proven over the years to be correct. Now you've got young Christians coming out of the church, and they're bringing all this baggage over, and what's happening is they're setting up websites. They're creating all kinds of neat graphics and presentations and sound, and smoke and all this stuff. And a lot of times they do a really good job, I have to say. I will applaud them for the good that they do. Unfortunately, the problem is they have not been schooled and trained and had the word tested in this faith. They have not been under an authority of somebody who has walked this out and knows how to do it and can lead them a long way and show them, don't do it like this and don't do it like this. This is why. And if you don't want to believe me, fine, go do it and exhaust yourself, and then you'll see what I'm talking about, and then we can sit down and renegotiate. But these people are coming out of the church because they get a revelation about the Sabbath, the feast days, and all the other stuff. And that's great. Praise Yahweh. That's fantastic. But the problem is they think all of a sudden that makes them qualified to be a Torah teacher. And they're infiltrating all these Hagar covenants and impregnating it into our faith, and they're hijacking people and taking them places where they ought not to go, and they're damaging them in the process. It's a dangerous thing. So my point here in this presentation, as you'll see as we get to the end of this thing, what was going on in Shaul's day is no different than what we're experiencing today. It's packaged a little bit differently, but the basic strategy of HaSatan is still the same. It's still the same. So let's move on here. Not be heir with a free woman. So in verse 31, then, brethren, we are not children of the bondwoman, but of the free, which is unrestrained. We have liberty in Messiah. We have liberty. We have the law of liberty. We are unrestrained. We have the kind of authority to walk on this planet and call those things that be not as though they were. What I've been telling my people is, you have got to stop playing the victim mentality. That whatever the devil's doing to you in your life, that you're a victim and you can't come out of it. That's nonsense. That's the identity he wants to instill inside of you and make you believe that. Because out of your mouth, whatever you confess, that's what you're going to fulfill. If that's what you focus on, that's what you're going to get. Instead, what we're being told is we're unrestrained. As my brother was saying last night, I just take authority over this and I proclaim this and I proclaim that, and I really believe it. And if you really, really do believe it in the heart and soul of your mind, body, and spirit, it will be honored by Yahweh. He's compelled to honor it. He can't go against his word. He has to meet you at your faith where you are. So we have the right to go into the kingdom of darkness and start overturning the kingdom of darkness and take back what he stole from us, either in our life or our generations that came before us. Anyway, let's move on now. Pervert circumcision to keep new converts from entering the temple to worship. As I stated before, there is a dual citizenship in most Messianic congregations. You have the Jew, who are the elite. They keep the Torah, and you have the Gentile. They're the subclass. They don't keep the same things that the Jew does. That same spirit exists today, and it existed back then. And it comes in the form of false Talmudic pariah circumcision. Pariah circumcision. There's a couple different types of circumcision, but I'm honing in on this one because I will say that most men today who are born in a hospital, who are circumcised in an unreligious kind of way, have the pariah or the mutilation. And I'm going to show you in Torah that when it's done incorrectly, you have taken on the covenant of Hagar. Does that mean you can't follow Yeshua? Does that mean you're not saved? No, but what it means is you come to the awareness of what was done to you when you were born to prevent you. HaSatan was trying to prevent you from the time you were born from being circumcised correctly so that you're excluded. And you didn't even know it. All you're doing is crying. You don't know why you're crying because you're in pain. But Yeshua, all things can be rectified through Yeshua, but this is about being aware again of the strategies of the enemy and how he works. He even started from the time you're born. Philippians 3:2, Apostle Shaul, Paul, does not mince his words about them when he calls them dogs, Those men who do evil, those mutilators of the flesh, which is katatomi in Greek. They mutilate the flesh. I have graphics, but because we have children here, I'm not going to go through the different types of circumcision. I'll just kind of explain it very briefly. Basically, what it comes down to is you have the malah, which is the biblical Torah one, which is the foreskin is just snipped at the end. But the basic sheath is kind of left intact. The mutilators, what they were doing is they didn't like the fact that the Gentiles were coming in, and they wanted to make them into a second class of citizen. So they snipped it all off. That is pariah circumcision. That's the mutilators that he's talking about here. They are the mutilators. And what they're doing, we'll go here in a minute. Let's see if I find it. I'm sorry, it might be a little further down. I'll get back to it. They were doing it with the intent to make you a second-class citizen in the temple. I'll show you that. Use external groups to cause a diversity of false doctrines is the next section we'll go to. Did you know that there are basically 7 different types of Pharisees? 7 different types of Pharisees, all having different philosophies. We're going to go through this just real quick here. The shoulder Pharisee parades his good deeds before men like someone wearing a badge on his shoulder. Yeshua began his diatribe against the Pharisees by mentioning the shoulder Pharisee in Matthew 23, verses 2 through 5. So if you go there and look at that, you'll see this is the exact kind of Pharisee that Yeshua had issues with. Who does as Seshem did, is circumcised not on Yahweh's account. So in other words, they get circumcised, but not because Yahweh told them to. Wrong philosophy. Moving on, or for his glory, because circumcision is a command of his, but of his own profit and advantage that he may get honor from men. That's his purpose for getting circumcised. That's the way that shoulder Pharisee thinks. That's his mindset. So like today, I'm going through a bunch of different groups that Shaul had to contend with, because I want you to see the different philosophies that are out there. And we're surrounded by similar type philosophies, coming from maybe more categories. But I'm going to show you there's so many categories of different groups that Shaul had to deal with that it was making his head spin. And this is where I feel like I'm at right now when I hear another story from this person, another one here, a new doctrine here, a new ministry there, a new Torah teacher there, and they're saying all these crazy things. The wait a minute Pharisee would ask someone to wait for him while he performed some good deed. He was oftentimes not certain when he should perform a good deed, so tended to wait. That was his philosophy. The third one is the blind Pharisee, which is a dashing Pharisee is also called, would bruise himself walking into a wall because he had to shut his eyes to avoid seeing a woman. If I did that, I'd never got married to my wife. Who walks gently, the heel of one foot touching the toe. You ever seen this before? That's what he does. This is his philosophy, okay? That's his form of righteousness. Touching the great toe of the other and scarcely lifts up his feet from the earth so that he dashes them against the stones, and would be thought thereby to be in deep meditation. So he wants everybody to see that he's in deep meditation. He wants to be seen of men. Yeshua talked about that kind of stuff. The fourth one, they call it the pestle Pharisee, Pharisee of letting blood. So this one walked with hanging head so as to not observe some alluring temptations. He walked like this. Who makes it as if it shut his eyes that he would not look upon woman, and so runs and dashes his head against the wall till the blood gushes out as though a vein was opened. This is crazy. This is crazy. But this, I want you to get a picture of this, because this is some of the craziness that Yeshua and the apostles had to deal with in their day. It's insanity. But this is the covenant of Hagar. It deals with the flesh. It appeals to the flesh. That's not the covenant that we're involved with. Let's see here. Okay. The fifth one is the ever-reckoning Pharisee, was always counting his good deeds to see if they offset his failures. I do that with my wife. I get in the doghouse every now and then, and I have to do restitution and repay the stuff and see if I'm in good standings with her again. The importance of it is, teach me what is my duty and I will do it. Lo, this is his excellence. If he is not an expert in the prohibitions and necessities of the commands and comes to learn, or thus what is more to be done, I have not done it. So that he shows himself or would appear as if he had performed all. This is crazy thinking, but this is what these guys do. Number 6 is the Yahweh-fearing Pharisee who was truly righteous like Job, who does what he does from the fear of punishment. See, we're supposed to have the fear of Yahweh, but we don't do what we do because we fear that we're going to be punished. We do it because we love Yeshua and we love Yahweh. And if we really have our hearts set in that kind of a way, even if you did do wrong, I don't believe he's going to punish you, or if he does, he'll do it with mercy and compassion. But this is the way they thought. 7, Yahweh-loving Pharisee, who had a true affection for Yahweh, but who does what he does from love, which the gloss explains thus, for the love of the reward of the commandment, and not the love of the commandment of his Creator. That's a little perverted too. It has good and not so good mixed in. So you see how subtle these fleshly contracts, how they just slightly tilt just a little bit. Some of them are blatant, but this one has good and not so good mixed in with it. Let's take a look at the Sadducees. They held to scriptures only. They rejected the traditions of the elders. They denied fate. They believed in free will only. They claimed that there was no resurrection from the dead. They believed that the soul dies with the body. They also that there is no life after life. There are no angels or spirits. They hated the Pharisees. They joined the Pharisees to kill Yeshua, or in other words, the enemy of my enemy is actually my friend. It's that kind of a philosophy. They were generally Herodians, those who took Herod to be the Messiah, or were of his party or of his government. Most of the Herodians were Sadducees. They had little or no following with the masses, but rather found favor with the ruling class. They liked to be in the elite. They sat on the Sanhedrin. You find that in Acts 23:6. Sometimes the high priest was of this sect, as Ananias probably was. Yeshua compared them to the leaven because they believed the doctrine of the Sadducees became sour, morbid, rigid, ill-natured, and swelled and puffed up with pride and vanity. Norman talked about this yesterday, about the doctrine, the leaven of the Pharisees, which is their doctrine. This is really in the essence of what I'm talking about, is Yeshua said, beware of their doctrine. Beware of their doctrine. Now, to confuse it even more, we have two primary groups that ruled the day of these other sects. The house of Shammai and the house of Hillel. These were the two primary schools of thought that most of these groups studied under. So, just to keep it simple, house of Shammai was a very strict type of school. So in Judaism, you pick which rabbi you feel most affiliated with in his philosophies, and you go to his shul and you study under his philosophy. And so you memorize his sayings, his teachings, and that becomes your religion. It's not about Moses, And if you believe in another kind of rabbi, you go to his shul, or his yeshiva. So here, house of Shammai tended to be more strict and more rigid, whereas the house of Hillel tended to be a little bit more relaxed, and some things they agreed on, and many things they actually differed on. Other contrasting opinions illustrating divergent approaches of Hillel and Shammai are their disagreement over the length of the prohibitionary period of entering the Havarut, or informal fellowship, of the Pharisees. Hillel said it should be 30 days, while Shammai insisted on a year. So they didn't agree. Another one would be concerning the Shema. The school of Shammai took the words, when you lie down and when you rise up, in Deuteronomy 6:7, with extreme literalism. So, claiming that the Shema must be recited in a reclining position in the evening and only while standing in the morning. Hillel school taught that the passage referred to times of recitation rather than the posture. So this gets a little nuts, doesn't it? Gets a little monotonous and a little crazy. And I'm glad we don't have to follow all this craziness. We have liberty. We have freedom. in what Yeshua has given us. We just need to figure out what it is, and it's certainly not all this stuff. A third one was Shammai and Hillel differed on what constituted the grounds of the bill of divorcement in Deuteronomy 24:1. I must pause here. Norman has a fantastic video on Yahweh's heart in marriage. I think that's the best video or teaching I've ever seen on how Yahweh views marriage. I learned a lot from it. Hillel allowed divorce for any cause, whereas Shammai limited to sexual immorality. This discussion in the school forms the background of the Pharisees' question to Yeshua was against Hillel, in their opinion. Let's see. Shammai also was known for strictness in applying the law to his own family. For example, he insisted on his minor son fasting on Yom Kippur, but Hillel ordered him to feed him with his own hand. As has been mentioned, the Judaism that survived the destruction of the temple was Pharisaic. Okay, but we haven't even considered the other groups. You mean to tell me there's more groups? Yeah, there's more groups. Now, I think you begin to understand why this was like an 18-hour teaching that took about 3 months. I'm just not going to get into them, but I'm just going to recite some of them. The Herodians, the scribes, the Sanhedrin, the Ebionites. The Ebionites used to like to follow behind Paul, and when he leaves, they go to his congregation, and to show that they're righteous because they got circumcised, they would expose themselves to the men to prove that they were circumcised, so they can win converts. It's just crazy. But anyway, let's move on. Samaritans, Dosithians, Essenes, Zealots, and the imperial cults. I want to stop here for a moment about the imperial cults, because most people in the body of Messiah not only don't understand what an imperial cult is, they don't even know they're indulging in it. Imperial cults, to play it simply, is the worship of political leaders. Back in their day, there were some that were so devoutly adhered to with Herod, for example, they actually had ritual baths in which they would go into the baths to purify themselves before they worship Herod. Some of the Jews did this. Rabbinic Jews, Talmudic Jews. That's what they did. It's crazy. But in today, we still worship imperial cults. Because I go to places, well, in the past, I don't go now, but when I would go to places, I'd see brothers fighting over different political leaders. Oh, well, I believe in, the Republican Party, or I believe in the Independent, or I believe in the Democratic, and they get into a war over it. Well, where did that war come from? That war comes from the fact that they have given themselves over to imperial worship. They have given themselves over to imperial worship. If they didn't let the unclean spirits of secular politics to come into their belief system as part of their belief system, those two brothers wouldn't be fighting. Division doesn't come from Yahweh, it comes from the one who causes division. We have to be a committee of one to make sure that we are not indulging in things that society has taught us is a normal part of your citizenship. As Hebrews says, we're sojourners. We're just passing through. Sorry, bro. Nice to see you all. I'm just passing through. I'm not here to stay. I look to a heavenly kingdom and the king that sits on that throne, not these guys. Do I disrespect these people? Absolutely not. I pray for them. I pray that Yahweh used them for what Yahweh designed them to be, but He puts them in authority. But if they come to me and tell me that I can't do such and such, and it contradicts the Torah, that I need to put a foot down. So the point here is that imperial cults is the worship political leaders of the day, all played a part in causing divisions within the covenant, and it still exists to this day. In other forms and other groups, but still the same. Now we're into Galatians chapter 5. Stand fast, therefore, in the liberty or moral freedom by which Messiah has made us free, and do not be entangled again with the yoke of bondage of slavery. See, when we start indulging in these philosophies of men, we are entangling ourselves into slavery. And we're taking on the Hagar covenant, which is a covenant of flesh, because it deals with the flesh. It comes from a fleshly, carnal mind thinking, which is what HaSatan is all about. If he can get you out of the spirit and into the flesh, he's done his job. And it's our job to be a committee to one to make sure that we don't fall into that trap. Verse 2, indeed, I, Paul, say to you that if you become circumcised, Messiah will profit you nothing. And I testify as one who experienced martyrdom for this. Again, to every man who becomes circumcised, that he's a debtor, owner, as one who is in debt and denotes a separation. Note this. Let's move back up, though. And I testify as one who experienced martyrdom for this. What is the this? He experienced martyrdom for standing up against pariah circumcision, the mutilators. That's what he suffered for, because he was against it. And I'm going to show you why in a minute from the Torah. Moving on. And so, owner as one who is in debt and denotes a separation. So what he's saying is, when you get circumcised for the wrong reason, and you cut that flesh for the wrong reason, and done in an inappropriate way according to Torah, you're immediately separated. You're immediately separated. Something happens in your spirit where you get separated, because you can't have two masters going on at the same time. You either love one or you hate the other. To keep the whole Talmudic law. Why? Because if you're going to get circumcised by pariah, according to rabbinic Judaism, the way they'll do it, you have grafted yourself into their covenant. And that's not the covenant we're a part of. But this is what's happening to so many people today. We have a female in our group who spends a lot of time chatting with people online, fellow believers. She had 4 friends, Amanda, I think it was, 4 friends in 1 month who believed in Yeshua, new believers, semi-new believers, 4 friends in 1 month who were proselytized by those of the Jews or rabbinic Judaism, and they denounced Yeshua and they went over and became part of Judaism. They took on the Hagar covenant. And it's happening. It's happening all around us. Some of us may be a little more secluded from seeing this stuff, but in the fellowship, I'm hearing these things all the time. It's very disturbing, which is the genesis of this whole study, of why I believe Yahweh told me to open this thing up and start really looking at it for what it is. Verse 4, for you have become estranged, separated to the point of cessation. You cease to exist in the covenant of Yeshua. When you do that, you're trading one covenant for another. That's what it means in the Greek from Messiah. You who attempt to be justified or show regard as yourself as righteous by the law or Talmudic law, you have fallen as to be driven out from grace. That's it. You're separated. In verse 6, for in our rest with Messiah Yeshua, neither circumcision nor uncircumcision avails anything, but faith working as an act of love. That's got to be our focus. And we're missing so much of that in the body of Messiah. I'm tired of seeing people at each other's throats. If you want to talk about a guy that liked to brawl with Scripture, I'll whoop anybody. I'll very much like Paul. I'll whoop anybody. I'll stand there and I'll beat the living daylights out of you spiritually with the Word. And what Yahweh, through my wife, praise His name, domesticated me. She taught me how to be more temperate, more loving, more understanding, and that's why I finally figured out why Yahweh put her in my life. She has been a blessing to me, because she has taught me that if I can bring my temper and bring my self-righteousness down under control, you're going to see a whole nother world. And she taught me that. Okay, so let's move on. For in our rest with Messiah, Yeshua, neither circumcision... Okay, I read that, sorry. Verse 7, you ran well. Who hindered or cut into you from obeying the truth? Somebody cut you. They circumcised you in some kind of way that prevented you from obeying the truth, because Moses didn't teach this kind of circumcision. This is of rabbinic Judaism. They're grafting you into rabbinic Judaism. It's a spirit, and it's an unclean spirit. Okay? This persuasion that convicts you of their authority, not mine or Shaul's, does not come from him who calls you. Oh, this is getting down and dirty now. A little leaven that boils up due to fermenting leavens the whole lump. Because now what happens is, you go and do this dirty deed, and then you bring it back into your fellowship, and now you start leavening the rest of the fellowship, and you corrupt the rest of them. Which is why I like the spiritual bouncers at my door. I don't let unclean spirits in my fellowship. And if I find out you're messing with something, I'm going to boot your rear end out. Verse 10, I have confidence and the authority in you, in Yahweh, that you will have no other mind as to entertain another opinion. As to entertain another opinion, but he who troubles you, so there was a particular person that he didn't call out by name that was doing this stuff, troubles you, shall bear his judgment of his crime. The word judgment in Greek actually means a criminal offense. Whoever he is. So apparently Shaul wasn't sure who he was or never met him. Verse 11, and I, brethren, if I still preach circumcision or Talmudic pariah, because he used to teach that, because he was against the Gentiles. He persecuted the believers of the way. If I still preach circumcision or Talmudic pariah, why do I suffer persecution? So listen to what he's saying. What he's saying is, if I was still teaching the old way of circumcision, these guys wouldn't have any problem with me because I'd be doing their dirty deeds amongst the body of Messiah. So clearly he changed his position on pariah circumcision, the covenant of Hagar. Why do I still suffer persecution? Then the offense of the cross has ceased. Now, let's look at Deuteronomy 23:1. This is really cool. He was emasculated, his genital, to make an allegiance or covenant by cutting the flesh of it. Now, this is in the Hebrew. Go check it for yourself. Or cut of it by crushing or mutilating. This includes the testicles as well. If a man has crushed testicles, he can't come into the temple. But that's another story. Or mutilation mentally or physically. Because see, at the end of the day, when you go to them and you subserviate yourself to those people with their teachings of their philosophies, mentally, you're giving yourself over first. And then they cut. And once the blood is drawn, they own you. Or I should say, HaSatan owns you, because we don't wrestle with flesh and blood. We wrestle with wicked spirits, principalities and powers in high place, seated in high places. That's what our real war is, and that's the whole point of this teaching, that this is how subtle HaSatan comes into the body of Messiah and hijacks his people. You shall not enter the assembly of Yahweh. So he's saying here, if you go to them and they do the pariah circumcision, you have misused your genital and cut it in a way that I have not told you through Moses. And you have now basically taken on the covenant of Hagar, and you're forbidden from coming into the assembly. Second-class citizen. This is what happens in Messianic Judaism. We have two classes of citizen. And that's what these guys were. These guys knew what Moses was saying. So if they can take the new believers in Yeshua and cut them in the wrong way, they can't come into the assembly. This was their intent. Let's put it. And I began to see why Shaul was so angry and furious that they allowed themselves to get caught up in this mess. Because it undoes everything that he tried to do for them. He brought them in from nothing. Verse 12, I could wish that those who trouble you would even cut to mutilate or amputate their private parts of themselves off. In other words, what he's saying is, he's not saying to cut off the genital, but what he's saying is, I wish these scoundrels who did this mutilation to you would then go and take and cut off all their foreskin too, so they'd be just like you. And then they can't come into the assembly because they defiled themselves, and they too have the covenant of Hagar in its fullest sense. Philippians 3:2, beware of dogs, beware of evil who bring injury workers. Beware of the mutilation who cut you off. Not just in the physical, but in the spiritual. Verse 13, for you, brethren, have been called to liberty. Only do not use liberty as an opportunity, as a starting point for the flesh. So what he's saying is, don't get complacent. You've got Yeshua. You've got his righteousness. You've got his faith. You've got his truth. And you've got everything that you need. You're fully equipped, but don't get complacent and think because you have all that, you get high and mighty minded and think that you can start doing this other stuff and mix. And then you diminish or annul the righteousness of Yeshua that you received when you believed on him from the beginning. As a starting point for the flesh, but through love serve as the kind of slave to one another. And this is what Norman's been talking about. We so need the love of Messiah in the body of Messiah to serve one another. This is what this structure that he's showing. For all the law is fulfilled as crammed up in one word, even this, you shall love your neighbor yourself. So I say to people who come to me in the fellowship, sometimes they'll say, Shaul, Paul, he's full of nonsense. I don't read him. He's anti-Torah. He's illegitimate and blah, blah, blah. He doesn't teach what Yeshua teaches. Excuse me? You shall love your neighbor as yourself. That's part of the Shema. That's the second great commandment. That's what Yeshua said as well. So how could he be against Yeshua if he's actually affirming what Yeshua says? Continuing, verse 24. And those who are Messiahs have crucified the flesh and its passions that are influenced by emotions and desires. You see, when my sister, John's wife, Patricia, cooks flan, she's touching my passions and desires because I'm a sucker for flan. She makes the best flan. And so that's where HaSatan gets us. He appeals to our emotions and our desires. There's the hook. There's the neuroassociative hook that he uses. He knows each and every one of us what we're a sucker for. Flan, I'm a sucker for. So I have a low resistance to that. In verse 25, if we live in the Spirit, let us also walk or march as military in the Spirit. We're supposed to march in formation with a very direct, specific purpose. We have a mandate. We have a job to do, as Norman's been trying to teach about. Verse 26, let us not become conceited, vainly glorifying in self-conceit, provoking as a challenge to one another, envying with jealousy one another. This is a wrong spirit. This is walking in the flesh if you're defying this. Galatians chapter 6, winding down. For not even those who are circumcised of the Talmudic Pariah keep or preserves the law, the covenant of Moses. They can't. They gave themselves over to a different covenant. But contrawise, they desire and intend to have you circumcised. Now, this is talking about in the flesh. Today, we don't really have that going as much. The point here, metaphorically, is Satan does this, spiritually to us through these other false doctrines that are creeping into the faith and whittling it down. But contrariwise, they desire and intend to have you circumcised by the way of Talmud Pariah, that you may boast as to vaunt you in the flesh, stripped of your foreskin. And when I mean stripped, I mean all the way off, not the way the Malah is supposed to be done. In 1 John chapter 2, verse 19, they went out from us, but they were not of us. For if they had been of us, they would have continued with us, but they went out that they might be made manifest that none of them were of us. How many hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people I've seen in 30 plus years fit that category is sad. It's depressing to see. But if you can learn how to mark what people are about to begin with, you know what to stay away from and you're on guard. My friends, my brothers and sisters, I pray that this message hopefully imparted something. If you already know it, great. I'm hoping even if you know it, that you grabbed one tidbit, one part of the puzzle that you can now fit into the big puzzle that you've been piecing together. And now you get to see a little bit more of a picture of the strategies of HaSatan and what he's doing in our body of Messiah and how he's hijacking and trying to water down our faith. Let's keep our covenant pure. Let's not allow the works of the devil to come in and corrupt our faith and diminish it and make us ineffective. Yeshua came that he might destroy the works of the devil. And I know he lives in every single one of you. And if he lives in you, then you have the authority to destroy the works of the devil with him in you. That is the righteousness that we don't have, but that he has, and that he can bring us to perfection. And we'll continue that message on Friday. And with that, I want to thank you. Let's close in prayer, shall we? Abba, Father, in the name of Yeshua HaMashiach, what a privilege and an honor it has been to not only just come here for this feast, but Yahweh, I want to thank you for using Norman to prod me when I really did not want to get involved. I really didn't want to get involved. But you used Norman, Yahweh, And for that I thank you, and I pray that you just continue to bless him immensely, and that you put your angels about him or protect him from those ravenous wolves, from those unclean spirits that would seek his demise and destroy what you've put in him to build as this community. And I pray, Yahweh, that you unleash your anointing upon your people. I pray, Yahweh, that you help your people to be able to understand the potential that they have in Messiah, that they have all the tools and the works necessary to do what they need to do to fulfill their mandate in their lives, whatever that may be. And for that, Yahweh, I praise you and glorify you. And I just pray, Yahweh, that this word gives birth in their spirit and gives encouragement and gives more wisdom and understanding that they've ever had before they walked into this building this morning. And with that, Yahweh, you get the glory. Yeshua gets the glory. And with that, we thank you and we pray, Yahweh, that you will bless us the rest of the feast. Keep the unclean spirits out of this place. This is sanctified territory. They have no business here whatsoever. We take authority over them, Yahweh. And with that, we thank you. In Yeshua's mighty name, amen.